Man, I feel like a little bit of a broken record at this point, just with so many great new progressive rock albums that have come out this year. Like, every time I think, okay, I think I could take a breather, I think I can, let dogs lie, man, another one comes out of the woodwork, and I am just taken away. So, yeah, let's dive into this next one. This Dark Earth by Moonletters. So Moonletters is the type of band that I love talking about. Just the little boys that could. This is part of the reason why I started the channel, so that I can give credence to some of those smaller acts and some of those smaller, bands that I feel don't normally get the recognition that they deserve. And Moonletters is one of those. This is their third record, getting their start in 2016. Their debut album, Until They Feel the Sun, is still one that I haven't actually sat down and listened to. It was actually with their second album from 2022, Thank You From the Future, that got me into them. I love their combination of the psychedelic, progressive rock that's, a little bit on the retro side, but still trying new things within the psych and the psychedelic landscapes. A lot of bands are trying these different things, but I do feel as if Moonletters definitely has their finger on the pulse of what works and what doesn't. What can music really do within this landscape? I'm thinking of bands like Southern Empire, Arabs of an Aspect, that kind of flavor of retro prog, where they're taking influences from bands like Yes, King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, even a little bit of Gentle Giant on a couple tracks on this one specifically, that provides something that is, although nodding to their influences of the past, still doing something very new and very exciting. And this is what kind of sets these guys apart to a lot of their contemporaries. Because I've talked many times on this show of bands that I feel need to develop their own sound and develop their own style within their music. Even though you are leaning on your influences, don't use them as a crutch, use them as a springboard into your own style. And that's what Moonletters has always done. I really love Thank You From the Future. It was one of my favorite albums from 2022. And now we come to their latest album of This Dark Earth. And it continues the trend that we got from Thank You From the Future. The boys are all back. We've got John Alday on keyboards and vocals, Mike Murphy on bass and vocals, Michael True on lead vocals and flute, Dave Webb on guitars, and Kelly Maines on drums. Now, I really want to shout out first off John Alday on the keyboards. His keyboard work, although it feels like, sure, you got a little bit of Rick Wakeman there. You got a little bit of Tony Banks. You got a little bit of Keith Emerson. It still feels like he's his own playing style, and this is what I'm saying about kind of taking the influence from the past, but then developing your own personality from that. I'm kind of getting flavors of like a Martin Orford from IQ, that very quick syncopated playing style. He's both very good at taking center stage, and we're seeing that very specifically on tracks like Silver Dream and In the Catacombs, but he's also able to play out some brilliant atmosphere and really laying down the foundations of where other, musicians can play off of. I'm looking at their first track of Energy of the Heart, as well as the more small and more intimate track of Lonely Moon. His ability to capture both is kind of hard to do, because some keyboardists are really good at doing one, but not necessarily the other. So I'm really glad that John is able to do both of those. I also really want to shout out Michael True. His lead vocal work is just fantastic. He's got a commanding voice. He's able to really belt them out, but he also knows how to play within his sandbox. He doesn't hit some of the high highs that I know a lot of other artists will attempt to do. He's able to pull back just enough to allow for his vocal works to shine. Dave Webb, I'm going to give a little bit of a shout out to his guitar work, specifically on tracks like In the Catacombs and the big track, the 17-minute Dawn of the Winterbird. I felt, he's got a commanding presence on there. Once again, he's able to shred alongside John on the keyboards to kind of play back and forth, and that's one of my favorite things of a progressive rock and a psychedelic rock, of these battling back and forth of guitars and keyboards. And John and Dave do a great job kind of commanding each other back and forth. Mike Murphy and Kelly Myers, they're fine. They're doing a really good rhythm section. If there was anything I could see the band improving, it would be more of that, a little bit more of a complex rhythm section. But I'm also not going to sneeze at something that's not there. They're still very good at laying down the rhythms and laying down the heartbeat of a lot of these tracks. And these tracks are fantastic. I think the first 3 tracks off of here are really what you come to for Moonletters. You know, Energy of the Heart, Silver Dream, and Island of Magic Mirrors. These 3 tracks really showcase the dynamics of the band, how they're really well versed in one another. I thought that this was a fantastic way of starting off the album, and it made me very excited for the rest of the album. Sadly, it's the second half of the album, starting with Lonely Moon, that I felt getting a little bit disconnected, if I'm being perfectly honest. Even though I loved In the Catacombs, which is more of the single off this album, I didn't feel quite as invested in this track. I did feel like, you know, they were kind of treading water a little bit. And if we're going to talk about treading water, let's talk about that big 17-minute epic. This is the first of them really tackling a longer stretch of music. Like, they've done the 9-minute tracks before, you know, you've done the 8-minute tracks, but this is them going beyond the 10-minute tracks. And I feel this is where they have the most room to grow. I am seeing that they're able to handle a very complex track. Look at Silver Dream. But I felt like Dawn of the Winter Bird found them not knowing how to properly construct a longer epic. You know, the build-ups, the payoffs, the reprisal of themes, and not to say that all, you know, 18-plus minute tracks need to have those features, but you need to justify the runtime. You know, you need to justify the time being spent in this track, and I just felt like Dawn of the Winter Bird doesn't quite have that. You know, I felt like the big swelling moments were found on some of the smaller tracks and not necessarily on this track. I just felt like Moonletters was struggling a little bit with this one, and that's the only real big downside that I have of this album. But yeah, I just found myself coming back to Energy of the Heart, Silver Dream, and Island of Magic Mirrors more often than I did with Lonely Moon, In the Catacombs, and Dawn of the Winter Bird. Now, that all being said, I still think this is a fantastic album from Moonletters. I probably will go back to listen to Thank You from the Future a little bit more, just because I think it's a better constructed album from start to finish. But that being said, none of the tracks off of that album are as good as those first 3 tracks off of this one. So yeah, that's kind of my overall flavor and overall take off of this album. In the end, my final rating for this album will be This Dark Earth by Moonletters is an album that I would absolutely download. Honestly, if we didn't have so much amazing retro prog tracks at this point, I could see this one being one of the best records of the year. It's got some massive competition, and I hate to dock it for that. But it on itself, fantastic record. I think you guys will really enjoy this one. If you're a fan of retro prog, if you're a fan of more psychedelic prog, I highly encourage you guys to go and check this one out. You will not be disappointed. And yeah, Moonletters once again shows that they are a band to keep their eyes out for. I am really excited to see what project they have next. I know they've got like their big magnum opus just waiting to burst out. So yeah, that's what I've got for This Dark Earth from Moonletters. What did you guys think about this record? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And that's what I'm going to leave you guys for today. So I want to thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.